Welcome to the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Danny Kennedy, and I'm here to help you become the very best version of yourself. What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast. I'm joined today by a friend of mine, Blake Worrall-Thompson. Blake is a performance and lifestyle coach. He has a very incredible story, but also so much experience and value to offer to not only the listeners of this podcast, but everyone that he kind of comes into contact with. For those of you who don't know who Blake is, Blake's one of the three coaches in the Momentum Lifestyle group which I've talked about on the show before, something I've been a part of over the last kind of 12 months or so. But he's helping people improve their lives and using his own experience to then help others as well. And, you know, this is something that he continues to learn each and every single day, which is what we touch on in this episode as well. But we dive into how to deal with adversity and how people, have different ways of dealing with adversity and what pathway you can go on to really do the work, which is something we dive into a bit into the episode as well, is exactly what that means in terms of doing the work on yourself and the personal and self-development. We also touch on the effects that, by not doing the work, what effect that can have on your relationship and your partner, which was a really interesting one as well. So I really enjoyed this conversation with Blake, and I know you guys are going to love it as well. So if you do enjoy it, make sure you take a screenshot of this episode, post it up on your Instagram story for us, tag myself, tag Blake as well, get around him on social media. We also have a free workbook, which we're going to put in the show notes as well. So make sure you use that link all around getting past your self-limiting beliefs, which is a huge practice and something that I know everyone that listens to this episode will benefit from. So big thanks to Blake for joining me on this episode, and I hope you guys enjoy this conversation. Big Rig, welcome to the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast. It's an honour to have you on, mate.
DK, I'm very excited to talk.
It's always good when we have a conversation. Obviously, the listeners to the show potentially have tuned into some of the episodes I've done with a couple of the other fellow coaches in the Momentum group as well, with Dylan and Genoa, and even just probably heard bits and pieces of me talking about some of the benefits I've kind of seen in particular of working with you boys, and I guess opening up my mind to new things, but also just building that relationship and the bond with everyone else inside the group. And I remember, even with the testimonial video that I did for you guys not long ago, saying something along the lines of when Dylan first reached out, I was kind of hesitant because I thought I was already all over. I definitely didn't think I'd mastered it, but I knew that I was already, meditating, journaling, stuck right into the personal development side of things. But even still, like the impact it's had has been awesome. So firstly, man, congrats on putting together such a good program. And as always, anyone who's tuned in, any fellas that are tuned in that would like to jump on board, you can find out some more information. I'll have the links and stuff in the show notes. But how's that kind of experience been for you so far, being able to now relay, I guess, your own experiences on to help other people in the world of, I guess, masculinity, but also just mindfulness and the whole deal, like tying it all together?
Mate, it's been brilliant. We've just kind of hit 2 years, I think this week actually. And, even as three blokes, we've learned a lot about ourselves, but also a lot about other blokes. You think when you're a bloke that you understand how all blokes think. But we've learned a lot. Like the first 2 years has been a really good kind of, I guess, almost beta testing to see what blokes need, what works, what doesn't, what they're attracted to and what they're not. And, one of the challenges I think when we first started and we're starting to see the transition is that the men's space hasn't been the most attractive space in the past. And that's a really big piece for us to make it, more attractive, more appealing, and also more accessible. A lot of the type of blokes that you and I hang out with, might have dipped their toe in for the first time. They might be listening to your podcast, the Joe Rogan type podcasts. But to go and, do quote unquote men's work is a big step and pretty far fetched for a lot of them. So, to make it a lot more appealing and at the end of the day, as you're aware, having been through our program, we want to be in a position where we get blokes in who we go and have a beer with and go and watch footy with. And so far, it's been really good in terms of attracting those type of blokes. And, I
I
think the
suppose
cool thing.
on one hand, you guys have been thrown in the deep end with how fucked everything is at the moment in terms of society with obviously lockdowns and whatnot. So on one side, everything's been amplified probably a lot quicker than what you guys expected. And on the other hand, it's a good thing because it's probably bringing a lot more, as you said, a lot more males out of their shell and almost forcing a lot of guys that may, if otherwise may have waited or maybe never have kind of taken the step to really take control of their mental health and whatever issues they've got. But I think it's the best way I reckon to describe this whole lockdown has been like a forced audit on your own life, I guess, and what's working and what's clearly not. So it's probably been in some way or another a benefit for you guys to be able to get such raw, I guess, emotion and experience through like the first few intakes, which would have to be a good thing.
Well, mate, that's the thing. It's unfortunate that especially as blokes, it's unfortunate that it often takes blokes to get to that level before they make change. But there we are, kind of sitting at the bottom when they're ready to hit rock bottom, waiting for them to kind of make changes. And that's the nature of men at this stage. I think fair to say, as a general of thumb, females are a little bit more proactive in doing the work than males are. But from what I've seen, obviously watching this space really closely as part of momentum for the last 2 years, but really, watching it closely over the last 5 to 6 years in particular, is I think we're probably 3 to 5 years away from really normalising men doing the work and making it a lot more attractive and appealing than it's been in the past. So that's also exciting for not only men and the state of men's mental health and men's wellness, but also my heart kind of goes out to the women that have struggled to get their men to do the work. And that's probably the biggest question I get from women is like, how do you get my guy to do the work, or how do you get them to kind of start to take action? So I feel for the guys who are struggling, and I feel just as much for the women who are on the kind of the end of it as well.
Two things there. The first one, like, how long do you think it is until we, and it's pretty hard to put a number on, I guess, but how long do you think it is until we see more males, quote unquote, doing the work before hitting rock bottom, compared to now? Like, as you said, it does take more often than not, males in particular, to reach a point where, at the lowest of lows, to really be, to make a decision to do something about it. How long do you think it's going to take until that becomes a bit more normal, and what needs to happen for that to be the case?
Yeah, I look at two transitions. I look at what online dating was 10 years ago when we were starting to break the stigma.
Yeah.
And I look at what mental health was 5 years ago. If you remember those, there was talk of it and a little bit of rustling going on.
Meditation and stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, one of the biggest movements is men doing the work, or the men's movement. So I'd say it's probably 3 to 5 years away from men getting in a really bad place where they're somewhat more proactive. Yep. And to be fair, one of the things that I think is fair, as an outsider looking in is, one, the stigma, but two, there wasn't many options for blokes, like you and I. Like, I love personal development and I'm into some fucking weird shit. But even with that approach, I was very hesitant to jump into any of the kind of men's, quote unquote circles, which again, has a stigma around it for good reason. Like there wasn't many options, and, I'm seeing more and more options pop up, which is amazing for men in general. Because the more options there are, the more, you're likely to find something that suits. Similar to kind of, I guess our industry, 15 years ago, there was, what was there? There was, those body pump classes. There was only 4 or 5, options outside of one-on-one training, and, the group space now, there's something for everyone. So I'm excited about more and more options becoming available to men, and men finding something that resonates with them, which I think is, a really important part.
In terms of as you said before, you'd gone through a lot of the stuff yourself. You'd done a lot of the quote unquote work. And before you keep going, like, are you able to just quickly elaborate on what you mean by, I guess, the phrase putting in the work? For a lot of people that are listening are probably just like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
In terms of the work. So like, what type of stuff, for those that have no idea to it, like what does that include?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the work is really anything that's bettering yourself, whether it's relationship, whether it's your own mental health, whether it's, even, I guess, in a roundabout way, doing the work, can relate to kind of your health and fitness as well. So doing the work is, somewhat personal development, bettering yourself, having you better tomorrow than you are today. And, the big thing with it is it doesn't have to be an overnight transformation. Like, you can start really simple and start small. But there's a real piece, as there is with kind of health and fitness, there's a real piece around consistency, just constantly improving yourself, albeit one foot in front of the other, to make sure that you're better than you were tomorrow. And everyone benefits from that, whether it's your partner, your friends, family, work colleagues, clients, whatever it may be. So just continuously improving and getting a little bit better than you were yesterday.
And just moving on from that, like what you said before, like you'd had your own experiences and it was exciting and also a little bit daunting jumping into working with other men in a group, I guess, environment to hopefully have the same effect. As you touched on, like, everyone is just so incredibly different in terms of what they're going through or how they respond to it and what they do and don't respond to. For some people, like, I never thought that meditation would be something for me, whereas now it's something that I can't go without. Whereas I know for a fact that there's other people that, regardless of what fucking research they see, they're just never going to get around it. So how do you navigate your way through that in terms of, yes, certain things may have worked for you and maybe a few other people that you've worked with, but for those that don't respond to it, what's the best way to, I guess, like when you guys are putting together the momentum program, how do you actually figure out what steps to take that are actually going to be effective for everyone in the group, regardless of what point that each person is at, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You're right in saying that everyone's different. And sometimes there's that line and, even I assume in the health and fitness space, you've got to find what works for you. And there's a level of consistency and persistence as well, which I think, many of us lack. I know, speaking firsthand from meditation, obviously, Janelle's one of my best mates and my business partners. And, I first meditated probably 10, 11 years ago. And then I was kind of on and off. And then Janelle and I moved together, to Byron in June last year. And I think I've missed 3 days since. So there's a little bit to be said for, I didn't really feel like, meditation was my thing, albeit I could see a huge amount of value. And then, back at it for the fifth attempt, essentially. And I've missed, I think, 3 days in, 14 or 15 months. So there's a little bit to be said for that. But the big thing for us as well is, when it came to kind of momentum and putting together, I guess, the course content, so to speak, or what we really wanted to kind of establish ourselves as, is we obviously considered our own limitations and, things that let us down in the past. And, all three of us have different stories and different struggles. So we factored in that. Then we spoke to, I think we probably interviewed 100 women, I think, over the course of 3 months to see what they saw from their side of things. And then, 100 to 200 men as well. And through that kind of collected what was important. And I think, one of the big things for all of us blokes, and I'm sure you can attest to this in your relationship, is like, fuck, they can see us so much clearer than we can see ourselves often. And, I would have avoided a lot of the pain that I went through and a lot, would have had to go through a lot less struggle had I listened to those that knew me best, being girlfriends, over the years as well. So there's a lot to be said for really bringing them into the equation of like, what do you guys see that, potentially blokes don't? And, for us, the first step really is awareness. And you realize that you don't have much awareness when you go through this process.
100%. On that topic, like, what were some of the key components, just staying on the topic of relationships? Like, obviously extremely important. And obviously as well, not everyone listening is in a relationship, but they do have people around them, I would assume, that they care about and that care about them. So what were some of the big things that jumped out to you guys that the females or the women saw that were the issue, or that really jumped out at them?
Yeah, it's two of the biggest things that stood out that I can resonate with massively was ego and lack of awareness. And they become two blocks really from you doing the work. Like there's a lot of ego in, so many of us blokes, and we, you and I both know it's all just a bullshit mask that we cover our little insecurities and everything. But that really stops you often from doing the work. And obviously, if you don't have awareness around the things that aren't working for you, then that makes it really hard to make change as well. And, those are two big things. And I think, a really appealing and attractive trait that you and I are fully aware of, but many, might kind of be struggling to really step into is knowing what your mission, passion, and purpose is. There's nothing better than really seeing a guy aligned with, what is true to him, and, seeing you and how much you love what you do, and, being in a really fortunate position to see so many blokes come in to the program and spend some time and us communicating, connecting with them, and then helping them get clear on that. It's been a big piece as well. But there's a lot to be said for finding what, that mission is for you.
Do you think without the awareness or the self-awareness, without being able to get a grasp on that first, it's almost impossible to really take care of the ego? Like, do you think that is kind of work hand in hand?
Mate, 100%. The more I've learned about ego, and I'm the first to admit that it's been a strong challenge of mine and I'm getting better at it, but without a level of self-awareness and that, without really being conscious of what's going on, your ego takes, it's either self-awareness and conscious that's, without kind of getting too spiritual, it's either self-awareness and consciousness that's driving the bus, or it's ego.
Ego, yeah. It can't be both.
It can't be both.
Yeah.
So if you're lacking self-awareness, which, I'm the first to kind of put up my hand and say that, 3 to 4 years ago, I was probably the most unaware person in Australia, then my ego was running the whole show. So it's an important transition, and it all starts with awareness.
I want to touch a little bit just on your story in particular, if you're happy to do so. Like, just to give the listeners a bit of an idea of like where this all kind of stemmed from. Obviously, you just mentioned, these things we're talking about now are things that you definitely struggled with, a few years ago. And I think, I don't know what your opinion is. I assume it's similar to mine. Like, I think regardless of how much work you do, there's always some form of, like, there's always work to be done. So even now, like, you being able to sit here and talk about how little self-awareness you had back then, I would say to this day, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's still periods of time where you catch yourself not having the awareness and being unconscious to the stuff that you're doing or saying or the way you're acting. So what was the point of kind of, I guess, your low point, and then how did you kind of work your way out of that, and what are the main pillars that you think have had the most significant change for you?
Yeah, the first thing to definitely acknowledge is that it's an ever-evolving process. Like, at no stage does Janelle, myself, or Deals think that we've got it all sorted. Like, we'd be absolutely kidding ourselves. And we never want to be positioned as having it all sorted or positioned as the gurus or anything like that. That's never been our intention. That would, again, just feed the ego. So, I talk about self-awareness now, and I'm sure in 12 months' time, I could look back at where I'm at now and go, dude, you didn't know what the fuck you're talking about from a self-awareness point of view. But it's a lot better now than it was 4 years ago. But for me, it was, there's a number of pieces to the pie. And I guess, anyone who's in a position where they're super passionate about what they do, often it stems from some kind of pain, whether it's their upbringing, different parts that have happened in their life. And, I've always been interested in this, and it was, I guess a natural flow on for me from 15 years in the health and fitness industry, where, once I started to see the end of that, I wanted to have, more of an impact than what I was having in the gym. But it really, like, my, I guess, spiraled down, and then, in some ways spiraled back up. All really kind of happened in a 3 to 3.5 year period. And it actually started with me filing for bankruptcy within my business, my fitness business. And 6 months prior to that, I'd studied NLP.
Yep.
And it wasn't until I studied NLP, for those that haven't heard that term, neuro-linguistic programming, it wasn't until I studied NLP where I really started to like join some dots. I was like, started to understand how the mind worked, how, so much of what has happened over the last, how many years was conditioned from my upbringing, and started to kind of join the dots. And for me, as someone who's carries a lot of pride, also ego, but a lot of pride in what I do from a career point of view, like that was the ultimate, like,
wrapping your identity around your career type of thing.
Yeah, like, and I think any bloke who, and I'm talking about blokes specifically because we're kind of on that topic at the moment, but definitely not exclusive to blokes. Anyone who's super passionate about what they do or carries a lot of pride in, their career, it doesn't get much worse. And to kind of add to that, I guess as a male, you want to be the provider, and you want to be able to take care of that side of your life. So for me to have that happen was like the ultimate like downfall. And then little did I realize it was like the start of just 15 months of hit after hit. And it was a case of obviously me shutting down that business. Me and girlfriend at the time moving to Melbourne, got fired from 3 jobs. And in hindsight, like again, when the ego is trying to get defense, at least I was doing it really well. You're very quick to shift the blame. What are they doing? They don't know what they're doing. And then, in hindsight, you're like, fuck yeah, I can see exactly why they're going for it. But, fired from 3 jobs, applied for over, 50 jobs, that fell through. My car blew up, parted ways with my girlfriend. And at one point I found myself like, in Melbourne, which some of our mutual friends definitely got the worst of me when I had my time in Melbourne. But in Melbourne, directionless, purposeless, moneyless, and I was a couple of days away from being homeless as well. I'd just been kind of given notice. And on top of all of that, 2 things that really stood out. Obviously, breakups are really hard, really hard. And that was one of the hardest bits of it all. But on top of all that, being purposeless in my mid-30s was a fucking horrible feeling. And being as lonely as I've ever been, in my mid-30s, like really added to the whole thing. Like if you're struggling, that sucks. If you're struggling and you're feeling super lonely, that's like the fucking worst place to be, I reckon. Yeah. And, I remember having a real kind of brief thought of like, I get why blokes just end it. And that was my darkest thought of like, maybe, it would be easier just to kind of, hang up the boot, so to speak. And, that was enough to kind of snap me out. And what I found myself doing was really trying to create something. I knew I wanted to be in the coaching space, but I didn't know what it looked like. And I was really trying to create. And I remember speaking to Genoa, and, at that time, I was just so disassociated, just completely out of my body, just head down in a bad place. I remember I felt like everything had been stripped away from me. Everything, money, title, identity, girlfriend, cars, possessions, literally everything. And I was like, fuck, at least I've still got my mental and physical health. And God bless him, there was absolutely no way I had my mental health. And then the next week I ended up in hospital with what they thought was meningococcal. And that was the moment where I was like, fuck, I surrender. Like, show me what you need to show me, without getting too spiritual. This was the moment where I was like, right, I give up. And for me, waving the white flag really was a hard thing to do because I was like, fuck, mate, don't give up, keep going. But I was like, I don't know like what to do. I don't know where to go. I'm just going to surrender and see what unfolds. And that was my rock bottom. And then it was a case of really rebuilding from there. And interestingly, I did a ayahuasca ceremony the week after I hit rock bottom. The idea of momentum came to me. I spoke to Genoa, who was in Sri Lanka at the time, then Deals, who was in Melbourne. And from there, we started to kind of build out. And it was a case of me, needing to move back in. Again, bloke in his mid-30s, nothing is more humbling than moving back in with your mum, who you don't have a great relationship with, and starting as a dish pig at your brother's cafe. Like, that is the humble pie. That's the humble pie that I needed. The humble pie that I needed to eat. But from there, it was, really a case of things like shifting really quickly. The start of momentum, I got clear on my coaching, and then I started to kind of, as quick as I went down, that 15 months down, the next 15 months was continuously up to a place where, right now, the most fulfilled I've ever been in my life, and in the best place. So, I know for a lot of people, the last 15 to 18 months is really challenging. I think the two things that really got me through when I was in my darkest was, one, knowing that I'd done a lot of the work already. So, even with the really dark thoughts, I kind of knew how to work with my mind a little bit. And the second thing was, I held on a lot of hope and somewhat blind faith, knowing that, a lot of the people that you and I listen to, a lot of those great thought leaders have, been in a similar position. They've been at rock bottom. They've been sleeping on friends' couches, whatever it may be. And I didn't know when or how things were going to open up, but I just had, blind faith and hope and trust that at some stage it would.
I think something interesting you brought up then is, obviously you reach this point where, by the sounds of things, like the lack of self-awareness and ego was the issue, but you'd done the work already. I think there's, and I even have this thought sometimes, like there'll be weeks or days or whatever where it just tends to feel like everything's kind of just in the shit, like nothing's really going right. You feel like you're doing all this work, but it's really not paying off. You feel like you build a consistency, you've had some awesome weeks, but all of a sudden everything fucking turns to shit. And you start thinking to yourself, well, is the work even working or whatnot? But what do you think was the main thing? Was it the ego and the lack of self-awareness that was blocking you from even using these tools properly? And then second to that, for anyone listening that has done the work or is doing it and still feels like they're in a bit of a rut, what's the best way to keep themselves, I guess, motivated or I guess inspired to stay the path, you know what I mean? And not let the fact that a few bad days or a few shit weeks, whatever, really get in the way of the work. Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go. We're back. I lost you there for a bit.
That's all good. It should be sweet. Should be no issue.
I think I'll answer the second question first, because I think I heard what you said. Jay, Gennaro actually picked it up probably about a month ago, in that, and I don't know what this looks like even in a fitness space and whether you use this, there's a term called the Plateau of Latent Potential, I think it's called.
Okay. And
essentially what that means is that you can put in all the work initially and not necessarily get the results.
Yep.
And, Jay actually picked it up. I think he said a couple of months ago, he's like, dude, it was like you put in all this fucking work for 18 months, 2 years. Yep. And, you're reading all the books, you're doing all the right things, but the results weren't necessarily coming. And then there's like this fast kind of acceleration,
yep.
The last 6 months in particular. So I'd keep that in mind, that, the instant gratification that you might be looking for, that, so many of us are really wired to seek these days through social media and everything, doesn't necessarily show up the way you want it to. So, plateau of latent potential is one of the rules of thumb to think about. And the first question kind of cut out, but what was the other one you were asking?
That's also a good question. I think I think I said, like, you'd obviously done the work. You mentioned you'd done a lot of the work, and then it just wasn't correlating to. Obviously, it wasn't correlating to real life, because you still end up in a point where you felt like you're at the lowest of lows. Do you think it was the lack of self-awareness and the ego that was in the way, that was like blocking the potential for all the work to actually take place? Or what do you kind of narrow that down to?
Yeah, such a good question. One of the things that males are notorious for is the lack of awareness, but really trying to force things. Like a lot of the toxic and unhealthy masculine can come from a place of force. There's a really good book called Force versus Power by David Hawkins. And for me, I was trying to force everything. Whereas if I had a level of awareness, opportunities are always there.
Yeah.
But because we've got a head down and bum up, which is, you know, an old school mentality, often we miss the opportunities or we miss the warning signs. And I love, you know, the thought that like life will give you a little slap, like a little tickle.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't listen, you might get a punch. And if you don't listen to that, then you get the steam train that comes through and completely wipes you out.
Yeah.
And it might, I'm sure it's the same even in health. You know, like you might get a cough and you're like, oh no. And then you might find yourself fucking floored for 5 days and you still don't listen. And then, you know, 5 months down the track, you find yourself in hospital with whatever it might be. So I was getting a lot of the little taps from the universe along the way, but head down, unconscious, ego, just trying to kind of bullock my way through. Essentially what needed to happen was for me to come and get completely wiped out. And, you know, at the core of it, when I was lying on my hospital bed, I literally had nothing. When they say you've got nothing left to lose, I literally had nothing left to lose. Everything had been stripped away from me, including the two things that I thought I could always count on: my physical and mental health.
Yeah.
And that was the sign that I needed from the universe to go, well, mate, you've literally got nothing left. Like, this is your wake up call.
Yeah.
So we all get the little hits along the way if we're attuned to them, and if we don't, then we get hit harder.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that would be something that a lot of people will be able to resonate with, because it's so true. It tends to be, even if it's something that doesn't completely derail you, such as what you went through, like you often have, like you said, it might be something like getting sick, or to a larger extent, it might be something along the lines of like getting caught drink driving or something like that. You know, you have the close call here and there and you keep doing it and all of a sudden you get done and that's it. But for males in particular, I think, and even females that are particularly like super driven and passionate about what they do, something that I've found difficult and to an extent still do is grasping the understanding of doing less to attract and to achieve more. But not so much doing less, and I don't mean that by like everyone listening just do fuck all and sit on the couch and hope that you make $1 million. It's like not always feeling like you need to be full steam ahead, not always feeling like you need to be the hardest worker in the room, and like giving yourself like that bit of fresh air. So like do you have a good way of explaining to those that are listening about how that actually works, and I guess some tips on to how to allow yourself to really just sit back and not feel like you need to force everything?
Yeah, the first thing that is really important is to understand the level of conditioning that we've all got.
Yep.
And whether that's from society, whether that's from your family, whether that's part of your religion, you know, whether that's part of your geographical location, it's all playing a massive role. So for a lot of us, there's a real deep belief that, you know, you must work hard. Like that was the last generation that you know, essentially kind of forced that on us. So when we're here, you know, I kind of laugh when we think we've got our own beliefs. Very few of them are actually ours. You know, they're all kind of pushed upon us.
Someone else,
yeah. Even if you're looking at the science, they're even pushed on us before we're actually popped out, like in the fetus stage, which is fucking amazing to think. So the first thing to be able to do is to really be aware of your thoughts and start to question them, you know, and also on that is to find evidence to support otherwise, because you know, you have a thing called a reticular activating system, which will constantly find evidence that supports your current belief system. So if you believe that working hard is the only way to financial success, of which, you know, I'm sure a lot of people get to financial success and realize that it's not all, you know, the be all and end all, then your reticular activating system will find evidence. And, you know, that was a big piece for me around money. I've got a Google Doc that's got, I think, about 85 different, you know, limiting beliefs, habits, patterns that I was doing around money that weren't necessarily serving me. And one of the first ones that I had to do, was, and super common for so many people, money's the root of all evil. And, I remember as soon as I started this process going, well, fuck, that's not going to serve me going forward. I need to find a better belief system around money. So I started seeking out evidence to support that money wasn't the root of all evil. And I had a business coach.
So your self-limiting belief was that the money is the root of all evil. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had that
super
negative
common
association with money and thinking that those that have money have obviously shit people and selfish and righto.
Well, because the other thing as well, and this is something for everyone to think about, is like, if that's my belief system, you've got to remember your brain always wants the best for you. So if that's my belief system, then I'm going to find ways to fuck up my own financial success because I don't want to be a shit dude.
Yeah.
So what was really important as I became aware of that is to go, fuck, I need to find evidence to support this new way of believing. And I had a business coach. I just started with a business coach in Sydney at the time, a guy called Taki Moore, who's an absolute genius, makes incredible bank, is a ripping dude, good family man, like everything. And that was where I started to find new evidence to support, the new belief system that I wanted. So that's a really important piece for people to understand is like, you will find more evidence to support, life is hard, you have to work hard, or you can find evidence to support otherwise. You get to choose that path.
Yeah.
And that will strengthen, what's called the myelin, which is essentially the sheath of the brain. That will strengthen the myelin depending which path you choose.
That's that the self-limiting beliefs one was super impactful part of the course. I think it might have been the 12-week, like the first one. Yeah. That was one that I thoroughly enjoyed. And I don't know if this is if there's any way we can maybe even put up a link in the show notes for just if you've got like a little workbook or something like that we can give the listeners to try it out themselves, or something along the lines of how to at least become a bit more aware of what your self-limiting beliefs are, because that, like I said, was a super powerful activity that we did. And I think for majority of people that do the activity, like the whole purpose of it is to really become conscious of the unconscious, you know what I mean? The things that we put no thought to. And I often talk about just in terms of habits, particularly around health and fitness, how so many people are just on autopilot with their daily habits and don't even understand how the things that they are in control of are causing them to either not see results or push themselves in a direction that they don't want to be going in. So that'd be cool if we can chuck a link in.
Awesome.
Just moving back onto quickly the relationship side of things. Like, do you have any advice around whether it be for male or female, how to approach, I guess, your partner or someone that you care about deeply when you do notice that there is issues or things that they need to work on? Because I mean, something that I've found is, even with meditation, once I realized how impactful it was for me, I was like, fuck, everyone should be doing this. Like, I was telling everyone about it and wondering why the fuck no one else was following my lead. And then it wasn't until I kind of stepped away from that and just started almost like, as cliche as it is, leading by example, like showing, just making people aware of the fact that I was meditating and the benefits it had on me, and not trying to push it on anyone at all. All of a sudden, people around me wanted to start doing it, and it became something that they made the choice to do, which I think is really important. So, like I've rambled on a bit there, but what bit of advice do you have for someone who is around their partner or loved one or family member or whatever that needs to do the work, how they can encourage them to kind of move in the right direction without coming across as a bit of an asshole or someone that's just
The first thing which you nailed perfectly is that you need to lead by example. And even, if you look into the psychology of parenting, one of the really interesting things around that is that a lot of parents will, tell their kids what to do. But if you look into psychology of it, the kids are more invested in what the parents are actually doing than what they're saying. So you need to be leading by example. If you want your kids to be healthy, you need to be, leading by example. If you want your kids to do A, B, and C, it's a massive piece to it. One thing I'll say, and it's such a suit, I think it's probably the most common question I get asked by females is, how do I get my guy to kind of, do that work? And the first bit would definitely be to lead by example. The second thing is to find those little moments that you really love and pay more attention to what they're doing than what they're not doing. So instead of noticing, that he's not reading, a book on intimate communication and connection that you'd love him to read, can you, pay a little bit more attention to the Joe Rogan podcast that he's listening to, or the DK podcast he's listening to, because through that positive reinforcement, you're more likely to get more of that. So, if you as a female are talking about how attractive, or how attracted you are to your partner, after you listen to DK's latest podcast, then from a bloke psychology,
which does work, by the way, guys.
It does work. Yeah, use that line. Then he's a lot more likely to go, well, fuck, I want my, like, we all want to be desired, and definitely we all want to be appreciated. But if a bloke's going, fuck, is that all it takes for my partner to desire me? Then that's a good place to start. So look for the openings, and they might be small. It might be, he's listened to a podcast for 15 minutes, and that was just your little opening to, from a sincere and authentic place, but to acknowledge, how sexy that is, or how attractive you find it, or, how happy it makes you, as opposed to all the times that he didn't, listen to a podcast or read that book, whatever it may be.
Yeah. I think on the other side of it, like for the person that maybe does have the self-awareness and the consciousness around what they're doing and what is and isn't working and whatnot, it can be super difficult and almost draining to feel like you're constantly having to try and shift someone's perspective. So aside from that, like, what's your advice for that individual, for the person that feels like they've got that consciousness and awareness now, but their partner may not? How do you approach that in terms of, like you said, you can do the small things and pick up on the things they do well and lead by example and stuff, but I'm sure a lot of people listening to an extent are doing those things and it's still not really moving the needle. So what's your best advice for that individual?
This may rattle a few people, but the best thing that you can do is, and this kind of almost goes against what we just said, but the best thing you can do is create a space for the person to be exactly who they are and the best version of that. So often we will get into, a relationship with the ideal version of them. Like, this guy's got so much potential, this girl's got so much potential, as opposed to who they really are.
Yeah. And,
I've spent a lot of time really kind of looking into, again, without getting into kind of woo-woo, what is a conscious relationship? And essentially, one of the big bits is, how do you create, a safe container for them to be themselves and the best version of themselves, as opposed to a cage. And that's a real challenge for many people. If you're looking to kind of the indoctrination of us males, in particular as well, is we can find ourselves through generations trying to control the feminine, as opposed to really create space for them to kind of step into, themselves and the fullest version of themselves. So that's a big bit. I think the other thing as well is, DeMartini talks about this a lot, and I think you had him on your podcast recently, didn't you?
Yeah. He was awesome. Yeah.
Massive win. Yeah. So if those guys have listened to that episode, and I don't know if you guys touched on relationships, but he's obviously, massive on values, and he's like, you should spend a lot of time searching, the world, so to speak, for someone who's got similar values. They don't have to have the exact same values, but similar values. So what that means is that, like, if you're big on growth, and I'm sure that the majority of people here that are listening, are on this podcast for growth, then it's likely you're going to want to find someone who also values growth as well. So that's another piece of the equation.
That's awesome. And for those that are listening, that are maybe having that realization that it is time to do the work, or even just making the conscious decision, or maybe they are listening and they have hit a point where they're just, they're not willing to take anymore. Maybe it's a low point. What I know the journey is different for everyone, but male or female, like, what's the best first step that someone can take to really start their path on kind of personal development and I guess self-mastery, I guess you could say?
The first thing I would get you to consider is almost going against what you just said, but it's being mindful not to just consume. Because, they can listen to 100 of your podcasts, which, would be unreal. But if there's no implementation, then it's all just mental masturbation. You're not doing anything with it. So it doesn't matter how small or big it is. My suggestion is obviously to start small, but making sure that there's implementation. And that might look like, you go and do a meditation course on a weekend, and then you start with 3 minutes of meditation for the next month. It doesn't matter what it is. I don't know what your rules are around, health and fitness, but the fact that you're starting to wire the brain for like every single morning, as opposed to a hero effort on a Monday morning where you do 30-minute meditation, and then by Friday, the wheels are falling off and you're not doing anything. Just get it simple. Like, start with your 3-minute meditation in the morning. Start with your journaling. Start with, having a ritual of connection with your partner where, every Sunday you go for a walk and you talk about the relationship, whatever it may be. Like, it doesn't have to be massive, but I guess, the core of it is, again, coming back to some of DeMartini's work, is work out what you value and really, put a lot of time and energy into that. If you value a relationship, awesome. If you value career, awesome. Whatever it is, if you're looking for, I guess, the quickest way for, quote unquote, happiness and fulfillment, is work out what your value hierarchy is and put some time and energy into really, fine tuning that. So if, your number one value is health and fitness, what does 1% better tomorrow look like in that? If your number one value is your relationship, what does 1% better look like that tomorrow? So don't try to break records, just start small.
Very similar to habit stacking, I guess.
Awesome, man. Well, look, I think there's heaps there for people to take away and plenty of value, and I'm sure at some point in the very near future we'll jump back on and do another one and touch on some more specific topics. But look, man, I appreciate your time. It was really good, and like I said, I've learnt a shitload from you boys, and I think even just from today's episode there'll be people that have taken a lot away, which is great. As we touched on, we'll try and make sure there's a link for you guys to do a bit of a activity or workbook out of the self-awareness stuff that we spoke about, and self-limiting beliefs, but also I'll have the links to obviously Blake's socials and the Momentum website and whatnot in the show notes as well. So appreciate you jumping on, man. It's been good.
Beautiful. Thanks for having me, big fella.
Pleasure. Everyone who's tuned in, we'd love for you to take a screenshot of this episode. Chuck it up on your Instagram story for us. Tag myself, tag Blake. We'd love to hear your feedback. And looking forward to chatting to you again in the very next episode.